She was on the front pages of British newspapers, and even doctors of the royal house were fascinated. A poor woman who gave birth rabbits in the early 18th century England. He went from being a folk character news to England. It is not a fanciful tale, but an apparently true story that filled the front pages of the publications of the time. Since I wrote them, the poor woman has given birth to 3 new rabbits, all half-grown. The latter lasted 23 hours inside the uterus, before dying. If you have any curious person who wants to come and see with their own eyes, seems to have another in her womb, so you can come and get it out whenever you want. I do not know how many rabbits you were inside. This letter was written by John Howard, a prominent surgeon, Guildford, England, Nathaniel Street, Andre, court physician of King George I in 1763. The poor woman was Mary Toft, 23. Before the succulent history, Saint Andre did not hesitate to go to examine it. On 23 April, while urinated in the field, saw a rabbit hopping around her, running. So developed a fixation on rabbits, he wrote the royal physician. Since then and for more than 3 months, he feels a constant desire to eat rabbits, but as it is very poor, has been unable to procure any. When he saw the rabbit, surprised, Toft was pregnant and had a spontaneous abortion apparently shortly before the baby was born. Currently it seems crazy, but we have to understand that at that time many doubts about the concept existed. Even educated people believed that women could affect bone development of the fetus with their thinking, says Karen Harvey, a professor at the University Sheffield and author of a book on Mary Toft to be published soon. It was after this dramatic experience that Mary, supported by her husband and Dr. Howard, began to say he was giving birth to rabbits. Although dead, out of his belly seemed to be jumping into her, on her stomach, as noted Richard Manningham, who examined. Indeed, it was a movement in any part of the right side of his stomach, he wrote. Dr. St. Andre was born the 15th rabbit, and returned the case public. But one of the real doctors, Cyriacus Ahlers, was not convinced. I made the patient some questions, was not able to respond. I watched carefully, walked around the room pressing his knees, as if afraid that something would fall. With Ahlers in the piece, Mary Toft bore a rabbit, assisted by John Howard. By then I had serious suspicions, but I pretended great compassion for the care of women, which gave him the opportunity to Howard, to tell me everything that the poor woman had suffered, and he hoped His Majesty granted him grace, when all this was over, a pension, since there were many others who had been granted a pension without merit. The beginning of the end. Ahlers investigated parts of rabbit and found some pretty suspicious details. Had pellets in their stomachs indicating that they had eaten hay, and some parts appeared to have been cut with a knife. Technically, yes, Mary Toft rabbits gave light. For months desiccated parts were introduced to her body, she kept them, and hours later his body expelled them. This was an uncomfortable and very real process, says Harvey. The patient was taken to London, where he awaited the birth of her 18th rabbit. The case has already hogging the covers of all the newspapers, and artist William Hogarth made a caricature of the examination of rabbits, jumping on the floor. No, until the lie ended, 8 rabbit, said a report of the time. I find it incredible they have believed they could continue with the scam in London, observed so closely. Obviously they were going to catch, says Harvey. One of the keepers of the house, where he was staying, the alleged mother, reported that she had asked him to bring the smallest rabbit found. Richard Manningham was furious. I urged him to confess the truth. I said I thought it was an impostor, and that therefore he had decided to give a rather painful experiment. It was then that the woman confessed. I will not follow this anymore. I'd rather hang myself." In a series of confessions full of contradictions and cut sentences, the woman gave her version of events. "I had a horrible delivery. A monstrous thing came out of me, followed by a flood just after I saw rabbits." Toft describes what is an abortion and what came after. "My body was as open as if a child had left it. I felt pain like that pack my bones inside for an hour or more." But the rest of the story has 3 different endings in each confession. In one denies fraud. In the next, he says that helped the wife of a knife sharpener, who had passed through the village. And in the last, she involved her mother. Dr. St. Andre, who initially said he believed in history, recanted. Many say that Dr. St. Andre recanted out of fear that this case will affect his reputation as a doctor. She died 40 years later, and his death certificate in the church was registered as Mary Toft, widow and rabbit imposter. Many still wonder if it is possible that Mary Toft has staged such an event, and if such delivery can occur.